Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 6th Project ECHO for school and school-based health center partners. Today's didactic is about managing externalizing problems in the school setting. Our speaker is Lauren Haack, UCSF Associate Clinical Professor and attending psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry, specializing in cultural influences on mental health assessment and treatment, and accessible, culturally appropriate, and technology-enhanced evidence-based services for vulnerable youth and families worldwide. Among other programs, she provides behavioral and cognitive behavioral therapy and clinical supervision in the UCSF Mood Anxiety Clinic and the Hyperactivity, Attention, and Learning Problems Clinic. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us in context of, the end of the year coming up and also some really challenging circumstances that I know are impacting some of our partner communities. I'm really glad that we're able to come together today and support one another in these times for our last Project ECHO of the year. And so in that vein, I'd like to start us off by just doing a reflection and check-in. And so if everyone could kind of take a moment and think about where you're at in terms of these questions. And then I'm going to ask that we go on to a little bit of sharing with the check-in in a moment. Okay, thank you. I see those answers coming in. So to follow up with this, we thought we'd open today with just a check-in, as we're coming up on the end of the school year. What is one thing that you're really looking forward to this summer that you think might be restorative to your wellness? And so if you're comfortable, please do turn on your camera so that we can all share together and either share in the chat one thing you're looking forward to this summer, or we probably have time for a couple folks to come off mute and share. I can share that my family just got a zoo membership, which I'm really excited about. So I'm hoping to take my daughter out and walk around the zoo and go to the playground quite a bit this summer, hopefully. So anyone else, please feel free to put in the chat or unmute and share your what is one thing you're looking forward to this summer that'll hopefully be restorative to your wellness. Awesome. Thanks, Miss Phoebe. Thanks, Vanessa. And hopefully not having to go to the DMV again in a while, Emma, will be restorative for you. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started then with the didactic. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay. And as we're going, please, anyone feel free to put questions in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. I'd like this to be interactive if possible. So I don't have any disclosures or conflict of interest to report. Here's what we're hoping to get out of today. But really, I want to start by asking you all for your feedback. What do externalizing problems, when you hear that, what does that look like in your setting? So there's a number of ways that you could give us your thoughts about this. You could either hold your phone up to the screen and follow that QR code. You could also go to menti.com and put in the code 92514639. So what do externalizing problems, how do those show up or look in your setting? And I also just put the link in the chat here too. But so I'm seeing outbursts, aggression, attention seeking, disruption, withdrawal, fighting, giving up on classes, crying, attention seeking. So yeah, we're seeing that's a lot of kind of different responses and sort of a really broad spectrum of what you can actually see. No eye contact, mood, frequent nurses visits, right? So we're not talking about like a really cut and dry presentation here, right? There's a lot of different ways that externalizing problems can show up. Thank you all for that. So these are some 3 characteristics that we just want to talk through. They're characterized by problematic behavior related to poor impulse control, and this can include rule breaking, aggression, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and inattention. And specific childhood disorders that we associate are conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And we see that these are relatively common, with estimates about 7 to 10% across cultures, with a higher prevalence rate in males. And this could be due to genetic factors as well as socialization factors. For instance, one thing that we see with gender disparities reflective of sociocultural influences is something called the gender paradox. So the gender paradox is when we have a condition that is more prevalent in one gender, a child of the other gender, the less common gender, demonstrating those symptoms is perceived to be more severe. Right. So in the case with externalizing problems, we see that when girls are exhibiting externalizing problems, others often associate that as being more severe. Okay, so I also want to get your feedback again. We're going to do the same Menti poll. If you just go to the second question. And why do externalizing problems occur? And I know some folks were starting to put thoughts about this actually in the last slide. I saw poverty come up. But what are some other reasons that you see externalizing problems occur in the students that you work with? So you should be able to use that same QR code, the same link, and just answer the second question. Okay, so I'm seeing bullying. Learning problems, violence exposure, foster care, social stressors, lack of social connection, problems at home. We have a couple people answering that. ACEs. Great. Emotional neglect, problems at school. Well, you all, I think, hit on almost all, if not all, of the factors that the research really do show predict the occurrence of externalizing problems. So we're going to talk through these 4 environmental risk factors, which really show this developmental cascade model. So various person, situation, transactions between dispositional characteristics about the youth and environmental context accumulate over time and result in these externalizing behaviors. So let's first take a look at adult-child interaction cycles. So this is a really well-researched model, which basically shows how adults and students train each other on how to behave, right? So let's take an example and say you're in the hallway and you see a student isn't in their classroom and you give them an instruction. Please walk to your classroom. Now, let's say the student says no or ignores you. What might you as an adult do next? And again, don't give me like the right answer, but what do we typically do? We give the student an instruction to get to their classroom. They say no. Please feel free to put thoughts in the chat or unmute yourself. Say it louder. You got it, right? So we're going to repeat our instruction, but probably not in the exact same way. We might say it louder. We might use an angrier tone, right? Seriously, get going. Now, let's say they still say no. Okay, so what might we as an adult do now? Any thoughts? Say it again, louder, walk them over to the office, call their parent. Okay, great. So one thing that we might do as an adult is sort of make a threat, right? If you don't get to your class, you'll get suspended. Okay, so let's say the student follows our instruction then. What have they learned? What have they learned about what they have to do? Well, they've basically learned I don't really have to follow through on the adult instruction unless they yell or they make a threat, right? And what have we learned as adults? Well, we've learned the student isn't going to listen to me unless I yell or I make a threat, right? And so what are we going to do next time? We're probably going to start right there at yelling or making a threat with this student. And so you can see how we've started to already train each other. But let's say the student still doesn't respond, right? Another thing that we might do is just kind of give up, right? Whatever, it's not my problem if they're not in their classroom. I'm just going to walk away and go do something else. Well, now what has the student learned about what they have to do when they get an instruction? They basically learned, right? If I just hold out and don't listen to them and I keep ignoring them, they're just going to give up and I get to do what I want, right? And what have we learned as adults? Well, we've learned this kid really isn't going to listen to me at all, right? So this is just an example of these cycles that can happen where we accidentally kind of teach each other to do behaviors we don't really want. But by the time we get kids identified with having an externalizing problem, these cycles have become really, really ingrained. So the next risk factor that we want to talk about, you all identified when we did our brainstorm, and these are academic difficulties and peer factors. So for example, rejection by peers is associated with externalizing problems. And one kind of buffer that we see is maintaining a high GPA and being involved in extracurricular activities does seem to reduce the risk for persistent externalizing problems by providing structure and alternative social activities and fostering those ties to the school connection, right? We also see that a higher degree of emotional and behavioral self-regulation can buffer against some of those unhelpful peer influences. And so if we can use interventions like classroom interventions or counseling interventions that really shore up emotion and behavior regulation skills in students, that can help. So you all also mentioned ACEs, right? So we have really, really strong research showing a connection between the cumulative number of ACEs one experiences and mental and behavioral health challenges down the line. So we know that individuals who experience multiple traumas and have a resultant emotional dysregulation are of particular concern. So the number of traumas that increases, the likelihood of difficulties increases in a strong and graded manner, right? So this is kind of like the sum actually equals more than its parts. So we also know that trauma reactions can sometimes look like externalizing problems, right? So here, this is a slide from the Children and Adults with Attention Difficulties, CHAD, that organization. And this was actually a piece that one of my previous interns wrote about her experience seeing children referred for ADHD in the San Francisco General Hospital Clinic. And sometimes they would come in and indeed had ADHD. Sometimes they would have ADHD and PTSD, but sometimes they would actually just have PTSD. And this is really hard to tease apart because if you look, there are a lot of overlapping symptoms between these two disorders, right? So if we see a child in the classroom and they're exhibiting distractibility, they're not concentrating, maybe they're restless, they're showing inappropriate behavior. It could be that that child has ADHD. It could be that that child has ADHD and PTSD, or it could be that that child doesn't actually have an organic ADHD disorder, right? But that those trauma reactions are coming out and looking like what we might think of as adults to be an externalizing disorder. So the last bucket that we wanted to talk about is COVID-19, right? So we saw a clear increase in internalizing problems in the wake of COVID-19. Anxiety, depression, clear skyrocket. There's less clarity as to whether externalizing problems actually rose, but what we do see is that students who had pre-existing externalizing problems likely those problems got worse after COVID-19. Right. And we really don't know the long-term impacts, of course. I think we're going to be studying this cohort of students for years, right? But what are you all seeing in your setting? I'd love to take a moment for folks to put in the chat or share out loud. Are you seeing impacts of COVID-19 in terms of these externalizing behaviors in the school setting? And I think that's a great point that you put in the chat, Suzanne, about our last slide, that the definition of PTSD in the DSM as it currently stands is not very all-encompassing and doesn't include things like developmental trauma, complex trauma, trauma related to ongoing discrimination and racism. And so, we certainly have, I think, a long way to go in that research as well. Any thoughts from you all about how your students have been impacted from COVID-19 and how that's impacting externalizing behaviors? I know one thing I heard a lot when I was meeting with school staff in this last year was this lack of transition, right? So particularly like 8th graders who transitioned to 9th graders kind of lost some of that orientation. And so, and because there was, a year or more of really limited structure, getting back into that structure was really difficult. Seeing more anxiety, which can in turn sometimes, cause externalizing behaviors, right? And Miss Beebe, yes, thank you. So many issues related to financial stress, difficulty that parents and teachers had, right? And that stress and burnout and understaffing and turnover from stress from staff as well. Having a hard time connecting with each other, absolutely. Okay, so what can we do about externalizing behaviors when we see them in the school setting? So the ABC model, sometimes called a functional behavior analysis, or a before-after plan, is my single favorite tool that I've learned as someone who works with youth. And this is a tool that can be done really in collaboration with anyone. It can be done directly with a student, with a teacher, with a family, with a whole team. Sometimes I do them with my trainees if they've had like a sticky therapy session and we say, okay, let's like dive in and dissect what happened. So the steps of an ABC model are first really objectively and descriptively defining what behaviors are happening, right? And we really want to avoid judgment. So we're not going to say like the student's being really lazy. Well, I don't know what lazy means, right? We want to be really descriptive. Like the student is not turning in their work, right? We all know what that means. I sometimes think about if you were writing a screenplay, how would you write it so that the actors know what to do? And then we want to identify what about the setting or what's happening right before the behaviors are sort of maintaining their occurrence. And then what's happening right after. And when we talk about consequence, this doesn't necessarily mean something negative. It just means any response that keeps the behavior more likely to happen, right? So let's say the child's not turning in their work. The antecedent is their work for the day is written on the chalkboard. And the consequence is when they don't get their work in at the end of the semester, they have to stay in from recess and complete it. But actually, that might be reinforcing it. Maybe the student doesn't want to go to recess because they're being picked on, right? So we really want to look at what might be accidentally reinforcing these behaviors to keep happening. Then the next step is identifying goal behaviors. Okay, so what is it that we want to see? Well, I want to see that the student turns in their completed work with one reminder, right? What are some antecedents? Well, maybe I can do an understanding check with that student individually, in addition to writing it on the board for everyone. And what are the goal consequences? And really, we want to strive for rewards because those are more powerful than punishments, right? So every time the student turns in their assignment, maybe they earn a point, and when they get enough points, they get to earn extra free time, for example. So these behavior support plans are basically that ABC goal model, right? It's where we're having very, very clear expectations for the goal behaviors that we want to see the students engaging in. These can be academic targets, these can be social emotional targets, behavioral targets, or a combination. And then really clearly stated rewards or privileges that the student can earn. They could be home-based rewards, school-based rewards, or a combination. And really, we know that when these behavior support plans are done effectively, they're resilience focused and they're trauma informed, right? Because these clear expectations and structure help us feel safe and really give the student a roadmap for success and praise and reinforcement for when they're making steps in the right direction. So some behavior support plans, there's different forms they can take. They're sometimes called daily report cards or check-in, check-out plans, right? The steps for making these, I really like these two resources that you can get in the slides. But the first idea is establishing those very clear, SMART goals, right? And then establishing what rewards, and again, these don't have to be like tangible, expensive rewards. These can be things like privileges or choices, and paired with praise, right? What we know about students with externalizing behaviors is that their brains are wired to actually over-perceive negative feedback and under-perceive positive feedback. And because of their behaviors, they often are getting a lot of negative feedback. So we want to flip that on its head. We want to really strive for giving them 5 praise statements to every 1 correction so that they're really learning those behaviors and getting reinforced for the behaviors we want to see. And then you want to monitor the system over time and make tweaks as needed. So here's some other considerations that we want to think about, right? Be consistent and yet understanding. So these are all on the dialectic, right? We want to be confident and also respectful of where our students are at and what might be going on in their worlds. Really be genuinely yourself and also a role model, right? This is a good time for us to make sure we're practicing our own self-regulation, take a pause, have that self-awareness, and know what we need in order to model that for our students. And also providing choices when possible is always really effective. And sometimes limits need to be set, right? So here's just a blank ABC model that, again, I encourage you to do this with your students or your teachers or your families. You could, if you're meeting telehealth, kind of present this or do a Word document or a PowerPoint, or if you're in person, like actually write it on the whiteboard, right? It's a really, really nice tool. Okay, any brief thoughts or questions before we move on to the case consultation? Okay, so I just want to thank everyone who was here for our last case consultation. It was a really rich discussion on a complex topic, which brought up differing opinions, including sensitivities about racial and ethnic biases and what our role might be when these are displayed by families we work with. And really, this is part of the beauty of a multidisciplinary team brainstorming and learning together. And I wanted to say, if anyone would like to check in with us about their experience last session or in any of the sessions, please reach out to us. We always like to chat with you all and have, some feedback about how things are going. So here are a reminder of the structure of our case consultation, and as well as some group agreements, right? I think we really nicely demonstrated these last week with such a complex topic. We really agree for this dialectical philosophy where there's no truth, but we're trying to look at a synthesis, asking questions like what is being left out. We're really trying to celebrate diversity and change. We're all learning from each other. None of us, one is in an expert role. We're really trying to practice a non-judgmental stance, right? We're all trying our best and we all want to improve. the work we do is really, really hard, and it's really important. So whenever people are coming to this space, we appreciate that vulnerability. We're going to try to stretch our limits, right? Growth can sometimes be uncomfortable, and that's how we know we're learning and improving. And we all make mistakes, right? So, does anyone have a case that they'd like to get some feedback from the team on? So this does not have to be something that you've prepped ahead of time. Really, we're just going to ask that anyone has, a framing question either about a particular student or a set of students or your role in the school setting more broadly. You're just going to, give us some information about what's going on for you and how you think some team brainstorming could be helpful. And then really the team takes it from there.